Alright, so I started to edit the video for part 4 and I realized I had some video of cutting the cross member and stuff, but I didn't have anything explaining what I was doing. So I'm a little farther along now, but I'm going to explain everything that I did. So I had the fixture for the beams, and from the fixture I had the pivot points set in relation to the beams at the amount of up travel, which was 9 inches between the beam and the frame. So that determined where the beam pivots would be in relation to the bottom of the frame. So I drew on the computer the beam pivots, and then from the fixture I knew where this was going to start along with where this is going to start. And I actually had it set up incorrectly the first time, then I moved it. After cycling it, I had to move it again. So this is where the inside of it was, right here. And now it's here because I needed a little more clearance between the diff and the backside of this beam. And you'll see, I explained in the last one that I was going to box the back of the beam, and I did that. I just didn't do any videos. So here's a picture or video of that. So you can see, same template as the front side, just box it in with some double air plates to get more welds on that. So that's how I determined where the beam pivots are in relation to the frame. Got that on there, and then I started cycling everything and jump back over here to the passenger side. So this pivot was originally between these lines. So the axle was starting to hit, so I had to move this forward. Moved it once, moved it again, but then the diff was getting swung forward, so it was hitting the bottom edge of the beam there. So I actually had to put a slight kick in the beam, which I'll add to the truss and gusset that so it won't bend, but that allowed the beam, the diff, to be farther back and still retain center line of the ball joints in relation to the frame center line for the wheelbase. Okay, so to get the center line of the wheelbase, we used a string line on the front edge of this alignment cam on both sides, and then we ran it perfectly straight. And then from this line, that was our determined center of the wheelbase, we put a square on here to the center line and made sure this lined up, and then adjusted as needed. Once we got the wheelbase center line set, we set our caster on these. We had it determined when we built the fixtures to 7 degrees of caster, which sounds like a lot, but it works well off-road, so that's why I did that. And then once we did that, we used some scrap tubes here and mocked up the radius arm, tacked it really good to hold it at that caster. And then we did that to the driver's side beam, got that mocked up really good with a piece of tubing, so then we could start cycling it and we could determine where our pinion angle, everything was to start with, and it will retain that angle, so then we could check for clearance on everything and make sure this front end, as you start to cycle it, will be good. So now once the beams are on, the pivots are on, you start to adjust things as needed for clearance, like between the diff and the front, the backside of the passenger beam. And I had to cut this just a little bit more because the axle was hitting. So I actually have to clearance it a hair more because it was clearing right now, but it's about 1/16 of an inch away, and I like to have a little more clearance than that between a rotating axle shaft and steel. So I'll do that once we pull this back off. And now that the wheelbase is set, the caster radius arm is set, I'm going to start trying to figure out how to do the steering. And we have this knuckle on so I can mock up the axles. I will put the hub and tire on, turn it, and then I'll construct the radius arm so it clears the tire at full lock. And then from there, it'll give me the location between the axle shaft, the radius arm, and the beam ends, tire, everything like that, to figure out where I can put the coilover and bypass. And then once the tire and radius arm is determined, I can actually start building the steering, because it looks like I have a lot of room, but once you start adding steering with swingers, radius arm, wheels, tires, coilover, bypass, air bump, all that stuff, your space gets eaten up pretty quick. All right, so once I got the beams mocked up, it was clear that the passenger beam was going to hit the crossmember as well as the driver's beam. So the crossmember, the factory crossmember, which is here, it was boxed all the way to here, and then it followed the same shape as the back side there. So this, with it not even close to bump, almost at ride height, it was hitting. So since it was double boxed, I cut along this edge, so then it would leave this box portion. So we cut along this edge straight across side to side, and then we cut down and in on the frame, because this frame will be getting boxed from here, and then this will be getting gusseted. And then luckily, when we mocked up the motor, the air conditioner did clear. I have to drill a new hole in this location for the bolt to go, but that's very minor compared to the full aspect of this build. So once I got the beams on, started cycling, and then the beam itself hit the crossmember right here just a little bit at full bump. So I knew that putting the front diff in would cause clearance issues on the back of that crossmember. So right there it hits, and you still have a little over an inch of clearance between it and the frame. So I will be notching this back of the crossmember to get full metal on metal travel, just in case the shocks or something fail. It won't come crashing up and destroy the diff or the crossmember or anything like that. It'll be a solid part of the beam to a solid part of the frame.